We're going to carry out in Eruvin Daf, beginning in the top line of the Yomit, where we begin explaining the Mishnah that opened up the third parak by Kol Ma'arvin. Shiur corresponds to the Kalzik and Necheska to Anitam Daf. I appreciate everyone who's joining us for today's Daf. Some days we're going to speak about in today's Daf, which was the opening Mishnah which we began on the previous Daf, which foods may and may not be used to make an Eruvin and Shitufei Mevois. The halacha of Rabbi Yechon, which takes up a lot of and Aleph, is that he tells us we cannot derive from general rules in a Mishnah. Even if it says a klal, it doesn't mean that there's no exceptions to that rule. The halacha regarding water and salt together, that might be different than just water and salt independently, that then you may be purchased with ma'aser sheni monies, although in the Mishnah we said you can't buy water and salt, but what's the halacha going to be if they're actually together? Then on the base we speak about non-food items that may be purchased with ma'aser sheni, although the pasuk actually says that when you take your ma'aser sheni money you have to buy food items, we're going to find that there might be certain exceptions that you could actually purchase non-food items. Some of the key terms and concepts are ein lameidim min haklalis. You can't learn out from general rules. Even if it says a klal, there's always an exception to the rule. That's in our today's daf. The concept of what's called beis hapras, which is an area that had a grave that was plowed over, and now we're not sure if there's a kernel of a bone anywhere in the field. That's a rabbinically tummy field. The concept of havla, which is that in the general payment, included in that will be absorbed other types of payments in that payment. The concept of when you have a general and then a specific, do you expound that as what's called ribuyi umiute, which is an inclusionary terminology and exclusionary, or klali prati, which is general and specific, and there's different ways of explaining that, and you get to different results based if you darshan at a ribuyi mood or a klali prati. So we started on the previous daf, the Mishnah, we opened up already. We spoke about that a person has on Shabbos, from wherever he lives, he has 2,000 amas to go on Shabbos. Now, let's say he has his house 2,000 amas further, and the way he can do that is by he puts his meal over there. So then he can get actually from his house 4,000 amas, because what happens is that really his Shabbos residence is now technically over here, and now he can get, he's really sleeping here on Friday night, but he can go 2,000 amas this way and 2,000 amas this way, so essentially really he can't go anywhere on this direction to the right, but now from the left he's going to be able to go 4,000 amas. That's the halacha of Eruvin. So we started the Mishnah yesterday. We said about Chol Ma'arvin, you could make an Eruv with any type of food, chutz v'namayim and melech, except for salt and for water. And then we said about Kol Nikach B'Kesav Meiser, everything could be bought with Meiser money. Also chutz v'namayim and melech, where Meiser Sheni has to be purchased with something that you could eat. These are not considered as food items. So that's where our daf begins, as we'll see. The Yechon is going to say a teaching that's going to relate back to the halacha of our Mishnah. It says, Ein lameidim min haklalos. You cannot learn out from general categories, meaning even if it says klal, it says this is the rule, we don't say that it's specific, because there are rules that are not so precise, and there are certain things that are not said there in the klal, but they're really included, as we're going to explain a few different examples. And he says even a bigger chiddush. Even if it says except, it says this is the rule except for that thing, well then you could say, okay, wait a second. If we're specifying the exception, for sure the klal, the general rule is precise. Even so, no, we're not going to learn from there, because maybe he was left over and you didn't say everything that's except. You could have even said except this, and there could be actually another exception. And so now the Gemara, before it explains where Rabbi Yechon is going on, the Gemara says, wait a second, the Kamar, for the fact that Rabbi Yechon said, even the place where it says except, obviously then he's not going on the halacha of the Mishnah, because here in our Mishnah we said chutz. And from his statement that he says that it's even going to go on a case where you say chutz, obviously he was going on a case where it doesn't say chutz, and that's why I'd say afila, even to say, although over here it's only wherever Rabbi Yechon is going on, it doesn't say chutz, but I'll tell you that my chiddush is even where it says chutz, that still is not going to be necessarily this. It might be even something else. So that's what the Gemara says. So then heichakai, where was Rabbi Yechon going on? Because again, our Mishnah we said, you could make an error with anything, and also by buying with Kesem Meiser, it said everything. It said a rule besides Mayim and Melech. So obviously Rabbi Yechon is not going here, because if he was going in here, obviously we know even when it says chutz, because that's where you're saying the rule. So he was going somewhere else. Says Gemara Hechakoi, where was he going on? Says Gemara Hasam Koi was going in the Mishnah Masechtas Kedushin. Mishnah says Kol mitzvah says man garama, any positive time-bound mitzvah, anoshim chayavim and anoshim beturis. So men are obligated and women are exempt. And the Gemara in the first part, Kedushin, the V'lamadam Anaf learns out the reasoning why that is. Now, the Shloy is Magram, if it's not a time-bound positive commandment, it's at all times. Says the Mishnah, women and men are both obligated in that mitzvah. Now, the difficulty with that Mishnah is, what, the klalahu, is that really a general rule, both of those halachas? What, the chometz says, man garama nashim b'turis, any positive time on commandment that women are exempt? Hari matzah, you have the mitzvah matzah, the first night of Pesach, which is a mitzvah says man garama. It says be'erev teichlu matzahs in the pasuk in Shemais, because all the other days of Pesach, if you want, you could eat meat without eating any bread. You don't have to eat matzah. But the first night, there's the obligation of eating matzah. And simcha, regarding the mitzvah of having the joy on Yom Tov, where it says, "V'samachta ata uveisecha," says the pasuk in the Bar. So women are included. And matzah, also women are included, because the Gemara says, "B'sachim l'b'megillah medal," we learn out a hekesh. It says in the pasuk, "L'seichel of chametz shivas yamim," teichel of matzahs, which tells you whoever has the aveira of not eating chametz has the mitzvah of matzah. And women have the aveira of not eating chametz, because any mitzvahs leisa say women are obligated just like men, as the Gemara says in first Perek Kedushin, Daf Chav Tesem and Aleph, where women are compared to men for all einshim shekasi b'Torah. So matzah, the women are obligated. Simcha, they're obligated, like the pasuk says explicitly women. V'hakel, which is on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, after the Shemitah year, the king would stand up on the platform, he would read in front of them Mishnah Torah, say to the bottom, like it says in Seita Menal Menal. And it says over there, V'hanashim atav. So you have these three mitzvahs that are mitzvahs seishas man garama, who they're positive time bound commandments. Matzah is only one night. Simcha is only on the Yom Tov. Hakel is only on that Yom Tov of Sukkot. So it's not at all times. And yet the Nashim Chayavas, women are obligated. Didn't you tell me women are not obligated mitzvah seishas man garama? And so to the other half, the other halacha, you said mitzvah seishas man garama. If it's a time bound commandment, it's not. That's not time bound, meaning it's at all times. If it's a positive commandment, you tell me Nashim Chayavas, women are obligated. Hari Talmud Torah, but you have learning Torah, the women are exempt, like it says in the pasuk, you teach your sons and not your daughters. Perverivia, which the pasuk says, you should be fruitful and multiply. Umilu v'chilshua, which who's the way to conquer? A man conquers, not a woman. As the Gemara says, so women are not obligated in mitzvah perverivia. Or pidina ben, you have the redemption of the firstborn son, which is an obligation on the father, not on the mother. The Gemara Kedushin Chav Tesmanaf learns it out because it says in the pasuk tifdat, you should redeem. But it could be read also as tipadat, you should be redeemed, which the Gemara expounds that tells us whoever is obligated to be redeemed has to redeem their firstborn son. Now, a woman is not obligated to be redeemed. She doesn't have to redeem herself. Like the pasuk says, you only redeem your firstborn son, not your daughters. So since she doesn't get redeemed, she doesn't have to redeem her firstborn son. So you have these three mitzvahs. The mitzvahs, they're positive commandments and not time bound, but and women are exempt. So how can you say these as kloim? They both have exemptions. Rabbi Yechanan, he says, you're right, you don't learn out from general rules. And even where it says there, it doesn't say chutz. But even if it would say chutz, that's Rabbi Yechanan saying that you wouldn't be able to learn from the klal, like we see it said a klal, but there are exceptions to that klal. Now, Amar Baya, something says Rabbi Yirmiyah. He says that he says we also learned halacha where even where it says chutz, the halacha is going to be that you don't learn out from the klal. There could be exceptions. It's from a Mishnah Masechta Zavim. This is a little more complicated just because of the halacha itself. They said another general rule there in the Mishnah Masechta Zavim. Kol shenisa gabi hazav, whatever is carried on top of the zav. A zav is a man who had a certain emission from his male member, makes him tummy as a zav. Now, there's something called el yoynei shel zav, the way Rashi at least explains it. Whatever's on top of the zav, so whatever's being carried on the zav, his tummy is going to be tummy. Where do we know that from? It's a pasuk in Yikar Tezvav that says, B'chola sheyiyeh tachtav, whatever's going to be beneath him. Now the Gemara in Nidid Daf Lamed Gimel Anal says, what's tachtav? If you would think it means to say whatever's beneath the zav himself, that would be the halacha of what's called mishkav, whatever he's laying on. And that's not what it's talking about, because that already is mentioned somewhere else. Rather, when it says b'chola sheyiyeh hazav tachtav, what it means to say that the zav is going to be tachtav. The zav will be beneath that thing. Then that thing that's on top of the zav will become tummy. What's that's known as yoynei shel zav. So whatever's on top of the zav will become tummy. Now, the other way around, b'chol shazav nisa alav, and whatever the zav is carried on that thing, meaning the zav is on top, the first halacha with the zav is on the bottom, whatever the zav is on top, tar, that's actually going to be tar, chutz min roll except for something that's fit to lay on or sit on, but if it's actually not fit to sit or lay on, then even if he is sitting or laying on, it's going to be tar, like the Gemara says, you would think if a guy takes like a container where you keep stuff in, and he turns it upside down and he sits in it, you think it would be tummy because he's sitting on it, it's called moishavai. No, the pasuk says, Vayeshev al hakli, it says in the present tense, Vayeshev al hakli asher yashem alav. he's sitting on the vessel where he sits on in the present, meaning what's designated for sitting. But if it's not designated for sitting, then we say, get up and let us do our work with this. It wouldn't have the tummy of Mishka B'Moshe. So the only thing that when a zav sits on will become tummy is something that's fit for laying or sitting, and Baha Adam, and a person. The zav is laying on a person. The pasuk says, "Va'noisi oisam." It says if someone carries the Mishka B'Moshe, that person's going to become tummy, and included in what he carries not only the Mishka B'Moshe that the zav had sat on, but the zav himself is also included in that. So if a person carries the zav, he'll also become tummy. Okay, that was what the Mishnah says himself, the zav. Again, that was just because we're bringing in what we want to bring in for a Yechid. So though the halacha we're discussing is simple, halacha we just brought in is a little bit more complicated. Now, the Gemara says, is there nothing else what you just said in the category? You said that the only thing that, everything that carries the zav is Yomei except for it's fit for laying, sitting, and if a person carries them. But what do you mean there's another exemption? There's another case of riding. If you're riding on something, that's also going to have a tamei when the zav sits on it. So says the Gemara, wait a second, what's the case of something that he rides on? If he's sitting on it, that's sitting. That place explains there actually is a difference between Moshe and America, but it sounds like from what you're saying, Moshe, that was included any type of sitting, even type of America. So that wouldn't be considered that there was something left out. So what are you proving from over here that there's something that's not mentioned that really includes in the club? Says Gemara, no, anan hachikam. This is what we meant to say. What's called gaba de uchafa. There's the top of the saddle where that's something that you don't sit on. And that is something that would become tamei from the zav sitting on it, even though he's not literally sitting on it. And that should have been included, and it wasn't. The time they're going to Brisa. Ha'ukav, the saddle is tamei Moshe. That's tamei because he's sitting on it. For toughest means that he grabs a hold of it. It's the part when you're riding on the animal, you hold on to that wooden piece. Anyone who goes horse riding knows is that piece in front that you're holding on to, where you're not sitting on it, that's going to be tamei merkab. That's going to have a loch of tamei of riding on it. So wait a second. That's also something that's going to become tummy when the zav is on top of it. How come that wasn't mentioned? No, that's the second case. Obviously, we could infer that in lamedim al clothes. You cannot learn that from a general rule. Even if it says except. It says except for Mishka B'Moshe and Adam. There's another thing that wasn't mentioned that's really exempt. That's also part of that halacha, which was that of America. Now, Amar Avina V'Tema, something of Nachman. Afananam Tinin says a third case of this is our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, you can make an erev or shitu from a voice with any type of food. Except for salt and for water. Now, the difficulty of the sulek is there's nothing else that's not included in the halach of erev. There's truffles and mushrooms, which that's also a type of like a fungi, that those are also not considered as food to be considered for an erev and shitu from a voice. There's a third raya, you cannot learn from a general rule, but it said except. It already said you could use everything with the air except for salt and water. So it's already specified. It still doesn't make a difference. It could be there's another thing that was not included in the rule, even if you said the chutz, which would be kamein upatris. Now continuing the halach of the Mishnah, we said everything could be purchased with meiser sheni money, which, like we said, a person after he separates his bikurim and his trumas and his meiser rishon, now he has meiser sheni, which on the first year and the second year and the fourth year and the sixth year of the shemitah cycle he has meiser sheni. His second type, he has to take that up to Yerushalayim and eat over there. Now, let's say it's too much produce, he could switch it for money, and that money he takes up to Yerushalayim, and then the pasuk says you have to purchase food with that money. So that the Mishnah said you could purchase anything, any type of food, except for salt and water. Now, if machlekes regarding, we mentioned two halachas that said except for salt and water in our Mishnah. We said Eruv, and we said regarding meiser sheni, what you're going to purchase with meiser sheni. So we have Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yosef, and Chanina. We have these two different opinions that are going to tell us a halacha, and it's the same halacha, but chad masnei ha'eruv, one tells it on regarding the laws of making eruv, but chad masnei ha'meiser, one learns this, what we're going to call lo yishanu, we didn't learn this halacha, on the halacha of meiser, as the Gemara explains. Chad masnei ha'eruv, one learns on the halacha of the eruv, that lo yishanu, we didn't learn that salt or water are not going to be effective for the eruv, elamayim b'fnei atzmai, only if it's water by itself, or melech b'fnei atzmai, and salt by itself. And then you cannot make an eruv with either one of those two. But when you have water and salt mixed together, what's called salt water, then that's going to be considered as food because you could dip your bread in it, and then then you could go ahead and make the eruv with that. Which, although each one independently would not be valid eruv, together would be. Now, the other one actually looked this qualification on the halach of meiser, which is we didn't learn that you cannot purchase your funds of for meiser sheni. With water and salt independently, only water by itself, and salt by itself. That's with the Inakach, and that you cannot purchase your Meiser Sheni funds. But when you have salt water, then the Kach and the Kesef Meiser, then you can purchase that with the Meiser Sheni funds. Now, so the Gemara explains, the man that Masnei Meiser, the one that learned this halacha on Meiser, that you could use salt water, is Koshka Erev. For sure on the Erev, where all you need to have is something that's edible, and therefore the salt water, obviously it's edible from the fact that you could use it for Meiser Sheni funds. Now, but the man that Masnei Erev, the one that says you could use it for the Erev, Aval Meiser Loi. But by Meiser, when you have those funds, you cannot use it to purchase the salt water. Might have, what's the difference between Meiser and Erev? Because Peir Be'inah, we're going to say on Amud Beis, from the halach of Klal Prat, how do we know what you're supposed to purchase the Meiser Sheni funds? We learn from a pasuk. From that pasuk, we'll see that it's not just any type of food. It has to be something that's considered as a peri. Now, if it's a peri, salt water is not a peri, because salt itself is not considered, and water is not. Now, although people will eat, and it can be considered as an Erev, but as Meiser Sheni funds, it's not going to be usable because it's not considered as a peri. Now the Gemara tells us, when Yerusha came to Bavel, Masli, he taught this Loishanu of our Mishnah, a Meiser. That, not only Erev, but even Meiser Sheni holds that, no, not like we just said it has to be peri. He says you could use salt water from the Meiser Sheni funds. Now, in that Meiser, they asked him the following price. Hey, Yehuda ben Gadish Lavnei Rebelezer. He testified that Shalbeis Abed, my father's household, Hayulik Tzir, they would buy fish brine, because of Meiser with Meiser Sheni funds. Which I'm later, but Yezer said to him, maybe you didn't hear what your father's household did, only if it has some of the fish intestines mixed inside of it, because brine is not peri. But if you have some of the fish intestines from the innards of the fish that are mixed in, maybe that would make sense. That's what he told. Now, says the Gemara, the question is like this. The Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, even Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Loy Kama, he didn't say more lenient than what Rabbi Lezer said to him. Only by fish brine. I mean, Rabbi Lezer was saying, no, fish brine is not enough. It has to have some of the fish inside. Because then fish is one of the things you could purchase by Sheni funds. But he was saying fish brine. Because at least the shum de peri, at least it's the fats of a pri, meaning even though you don't have the intestines of the fish mixed inside of it, you have some of the fat, some of the oil of the fish in the brine, which is with the water and the salt. But just to have water and salt by itself, which is not fish brine, even he would agree that's not going to be valid for Meiser Sheni funds. So how can you say that you could purchase salt water with Meiser Sheni funds when you see that even the most lenient interpretation was only going to say by fish brine, not salt water? So that Rabbi Yisrael, he says, he says, you're right. This that Rabbi Yitzchak was saying, that if you have salt and water mixed together, that you could purchase it with Meiser Sheni funds, you're right, it wasn't just salt water. It's Ela Shenasla Teichan Shem. We're talking about that you put oil inside the salt water. You're right, salt water by itself wouldn't be effective. We're talking about that you put oil in. Now, oil is something that you could purchase with Meiser Sheni funds. That's the salt water that we were talking about. So that Abai says, wait a second, why? What's your whole chiddush? You're saying you could use salt water. You're not allowing salt water. You're saying it has to be fish brine at the least. So what are you saying? You put in the oil, so then it's because of the oil. No, he says that what it's necessary for is what we're talking about is that because there was water and salt inside this oil, so then he had to spend more money on the oil. And then he did what's called havla, what's called absorbed, like he then put in with that also, and that's the chiddush, that even in such a case, Rabbi Yitzchak had said that you're allowed to purchase with the Meiser Sheni funds that oil that has water and salt. Now, it's much more the property that with the oil, because the salt water, that's the chiddush na halacha. That you're allowed to go ahead and buy that oil, which is, 5 times more because of salt water. That's the chiddush that he's saying. You're right, so salt water itself is not a pri, and everyone would agree you cannot use it for Meiser. What we're saying is, what type of salt water could you use if you put in oil? And the chiddush in that halach is that you could do havla. Which the Gemara says, wait a second, havla mishar, is that really permitted to be done? Wait a second, you're not salt water. You tell me you're not allowed to purchase Meiser Sheni funds. So, but there's oil you're allowed. So you have a little oil, and you have petal, and you have all your little thing, and you have all of this water. You're not allowed to purchase water and salt with Meiser Sheni funds. Is that permitted? So he's more in yes. But Tanya, this is what we learned in the following brayso. Ben Bagbag, most people know Ben Bagbag only from either from a song or from a different Mishnah, but this is where maybe the one other place. Ben Bagbag Leimer, he says that the pasuk says in Devarim, it says that this is the pasuk that tells you what you could use from your money that you have from the Meiser Sheni funds. It says, I'll read the pasuk. You could use your money, whatever your heart desires, and our Gemara starts quoting babakar with the cattle, ubatzayin, and with the flock, ubayayin, with wine, ubashecher, and with old wine. Whatever your heart desires, you'll eat in front of Hashem, your God, you'll be happy, you and your household. Now, since the pasuk already says in the beginning, whatever your heart desires, so why do you have to go through specifics? Babakar, cattle, batzayin, and the flock, with wine, and with old liquor. Rather, it's going to expound each word individually to tell you a chiddush halacha. When it says babakar in the cattle, Malamadis comes to teach shaloikhin bakar al gabi ayre, that you could actually purchase the animal with its skin, meaning the skin could now be used for unconsecrated purposes, and you don't have to sell the hide to go ahead and buy food with it to eat in Yerushalayim, because really you're only allowed to use Meiser Sheni funds for food. So what the chiddush of the pasuk is telling you, you could buy an animal. Now the animal has many parts that are not edible. So you would think maybe, okay, you gotta sell it and use it for eating. No, that's telling you habla included in the purchase is included even non-eating things, which is going to be the skin, which is leather, that you could use it for your own purposes. That's the chiddush. Now when it says further in the pasuk, each one's going to tell us a bigger chiddush. Uvatzayin, when it says the flock, this comes to tell us you could purchase a sheep with its wool. So although here there's two non-edible things, you have the skin and the shearings of the wool, which are going to be chulin, still you could go ahead and buy that animal. When it says the vayayin in the pasuk with wine, is it a bigger chiddush? You could buy the wine with its jug, the earthenware jug, which the wine is inside. That jug you could use for unconsecrated purposes, and that goes into the sale price. And old wine, this comes to teach us that you could buy temed, which is you put water into the pits of the grapes, from when they're already fermented, or from the date pits, and when it finishes fermenting, then it's like a winey type of a taste. So that is also going to be included in that. Even though it's mostly water, you could purchase these things with the Meiser Sheni funds. Now, one thing that you see from this Ben Bagbag is that it says in the pasuk babakar, which tells you that you could buy the cattle with its skin. So obviously, havla is permitted. Although skin by itself is not edible, because it needs to be, like it says in the pasuk b'chalton, and you're not allowed to buy it, but with the animal, which is all flesh that you're eating meat, that you see it's included. So therefore, that's where we see this halacha of Rabbi Yitzchak, that ma'im melech, you could buy salt water when you have oil in there, and you're going to be spending more on this salt and water, which even though that itself you cannot make, you cannot buy with meiser, that's a chiddush in havla, but you can do it with absorbing it. Now, however, Rabbi Yechni says, man b'targum li babakar, whoever translates me, that why it was necessary to say this word babakar in the pasuk, Rabbi Ben Bagbag, who just said why you need to say each word, I'll take that guy's clothing to the bathhouse. I'll be his shamash. I'll be his student. Says my time, what was Rabbi Yehuda's difficulty? Is because kulit shrichi, all the words in the pasuk you write are necessary. Except for the word babakar. The loy tzarech, it's unnecessary, as he explains. Might shrichi, what's necessary? Because like this, you in one order, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to show you how the other order would show you it's unnecessary. You said the Torah would say only babakar in the cattle. I mean, I would have thought to say, okay, maybe cattle could be sold together with its leather. It's at least it's part of the animal. It's attached to the flesh. You can't skin the animal when it's alive, so it's considered part of the body itself. So I can understand that's included in the sale. But to buy a sheep with its shearings of the wool, it's not part of the animal. You could shear an animal's wool when it's alive. So I would have thought to say that would be aser. Oh, I would say no, because not part of the animal itself, not goof in the peri. That's the chiddush you have to say with batzayin, that even there. Now, because that's one of batzayin, had we said the case of the sheep with its shearings of the wool, I would have said, okay, it's at least attached to it. But a wine with the barrel, I would say that's not part of the wine itself. I would say it's not included in the sale. So therefore I would say wine too. Because when the Bayayin had the Torah said with wine, I would have said, okay, at least the jug is what protects the wine. So therefore it's part of the necessity of when you're buying wine. You can't buy wine with your hands. But these seeds, when they ferment, it's not really even a peri. It's just really water that some of the acid of the pits went into it. I would say that's not considered as a food item to buy. Because it's a right sheikh. Okay, if you did it that way, you would be showing me that each one word in the pasuk would be necessary. But says Rabbi Yechon, let's go the other way around. Because let's start backwards. Let's go to the last item, and I'll show you why babak is not necessary. Because the Bashecher had the Torah written Bashecher So Havamina, actually, if that was the only one that was written first, I would have said that actually maybe Havla would be Asr. You wouldn't be able to buy, let's say, an animal if it's leather, or the shearings of the wool, or wine with the barrel. I would say when it says shecher, it's actually not referring to temet. It's not referring to this water that has the taste of the grape seed or the date seed. To learn out from there that you could purchase the value of water with havla, with absorb. No, I would say like this. My shecher, what does it mean shecher? It actually refers to devele keilas. Devele keilas were pressed figs from this place keilas. Now that place, the figs were so intoxicating that actually the Gemara tells increases that if someone eats this figs from keilas and he goes into the Beis Hamikdash, he's going to be chayiv for going and intoxicated. So that would be included in shecher, where those figs, the peruhu, that's actually pre, and that would be included in what you could purchase Ma'aser Sheni funds, and that's shecher because that's intoxicating. But I would tell you, but wine with its jug, maybe I would say that's not included. Oh, so therefore I have to tell you not only shecher, which is an actual pre, I have to tell you also wine with its jug. Now, because had we told you that you could purchase wine with its jug, because that's how you protect the wine, so it's necessary. But to say I could purchase sheep with the shearings of wool, I would say no, because that's not necessary. You could shear the wool and say, okay, that's not included in my Ma'aser Sheni funds. Wine you need to, because only way you could contain the wine, you need to do that. But maybe by sheep you would say, okay, first shear the wool and then use the purchase funds for the animal itself. Because I'm saying that's fair to tell you the sheep, the feel like that even with the shearings of the wool. Now this is the problem. Now, babakar lamali. So why do you need babakar? It's already included in batzayin. Oh, maybe you're going to say no. Had I not written babakar, I would have said, Tzayin, what's Tzayin coming to tell you? The smaller chiddush. Tzayin I would have said is Agav Oyre'in. I could buy sheep only with its skin. Agav Gizasa, which is lesser, which is not integral of the animal itself. I would tell you Loi, that would not be included. And therefore, I had to tell you babakar. Lasuya Oyre to tell you the case of the skin. Which then ayata loy tzayin, then you have extra the case of tzayin. Latui gizasa to tell you the added chiddush of then the shearings of the wool. Says the Gemara, you can't say that because if the Torah would not have written cattle, what happened in the tzayin agav? I would not have said the way you're trying to say. I would tell you the lesser chiddush that sheep would be telling me only the skin of God gizasa loy, but that the shearings would not be included because the imkain is like what you just said. That tzayin is not coming to include the shearings of the wool. It's only coming to include its skin, the hide. Then the pasuk would not have written tzayin. It would have written bakar, which doesn't have shearings of the wool. Lichtav rechman the bakar, then write bakar. Then memela yatolei tzayin. Then for sure that you have extra that of tzayin. Now the kiza rechman or rechman tzayin, but since the Torah chose to write tzayin, which tells you obviously dafel agav gizasa, even with the shearings of the wool. So then you're back to the question, babakar lamali, why didn't you babakar? Hashta, if you find out tzayin agav gizasim is davna, if sheep could be sold together with the shearings of wool included in your Ma'aser Sheni funds, so bakar gavoyim, do I have to tell you that bakar with the skin is going to be included? I'm even telling you your shearings of the wool. Says the Gemara, I had to come and this is what Rebbe said, man the metagim the babakar, whoever will translate and explain to me this with necessity of babakar in the pasuk, I'll leave it ben bagbag, mavilna mani lebemesus. I'm going to bring his clothing to the bathhouse because seemingly that is unnecessary. But again, this is at least the source that we had said for the teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak of Havla that's going to be mutter because yes, what did we say that salt water could be used to purchase with Ma'aser Sheni funds? It was not just salt water by itself. It was salt water with oil. So what's the chiddush? Of course you can purchase oil with Ma'aser Sheni funds. Now the chiddush was, but Havla, like when Bagbag had learned to have a source of Havla, Rabbi Yochanan just had a difficulty. He says, I don't understand why babakar was necessary there in that pasuk. Now the Gemara goes back and explains, but my kamiflagi Rabbi Yehuda ben Godish Rebbe Lezer. We had mentioned Amen Aleph, parenthetically a brisa that said it was actually being used to ask a question. We had said that there was an opinion that said you could purchase Ma'aser Sheni funds with salt water. So salt water, even the most lenient interpretation said either you could use fish or fish brine, but nobody said that you could use salt water itself. So we had two opinions over there, Rabbi Yehuda ben Godish and Rebbe Lezer. So both of them say you could purchase fish. Their whole machlokes was regarding fish brine. Now, however, Vahani Tanoim Dilakaman, we're going to shortly quote Tanoim that they expound from the pasuk of the funds of the Ma'aser Sheni. It has to be three criteria. It has to have pre-mipri, it has to be a fruit or something that's edible that comes from something else edible. It has to be geduli karka, has to grow from the ground. It has to be vlad nisar. It has to be something that it's created from the ground. Which both of those Tanoim exclude, as we'll actually see in the Maskana, the next Daf, from that they exclude that of fish, and for sure fish brine. So what are they disagreeing about? The Tanoim Nominav said that you could purchase Ma'aser Sheni funds, you could purchase fish. The Tanaim we're going to shortly explain, which on our daf we're not going to see it because we're going to actually say they actually disagree regarding fish. But on the next daf, right there on the top, we'll see that actually they both hold that fish are included. So what's the machlekes? Why are the Tanaim and Omanav saying you could purchase Ma'aser Sheni funds, you could purchase fish, and the Tanaim we're going to quote, they hold that you cannot purchase fish with Ma'aser Sheni funds. Says the Gemara, it's a classic machlekes how you expound Pesukah. They expounded Torah. When you have a general statement and a specific statement, and then the general statement, then we have a machlekes because the pasuk we quoted before that talks about Ma'aser Sheni funds. It says, you're going to give your money whatever your heart desires. Well, that's a general statement. Then it says specific. It talks about specifics. Then it says again general. So there's a classic machlekes. How do you expound it? They expounded what's called Darshi Ribui Meuti. They expounded of an inclusionary terminology, Ribui including, and Meuti of excluding. But the Tanoim later on, Darshi Kloli Prati, they expounded with a general statement and a specific, as the Gemara explains. That they included fish. Darshi Ribui Meuti. They expound the pasuk of a Ribui and a meat, as the Gemara says. It says, you're going to give your money, whatever your heart desires in your shleim, that's Ribui, that's including everything. Then it says, Babaka with cattle, with sign, with sheep, with yain, with wine, with shecher, and with whatever shecher means, intoxicating beverage. It's exclusion, because it's saying only these specific things. Then it says, whatever your heart desires. Well, Chazal Riba, then it goes back and says another general inclusionary statement. Riba or meat, Riba. This is what's known as a Riba, including everything. Meat excluding, saying only these things. And then Riba, it's including everything. So Riba Hakol, you're including everything. My Rabbi, what are you including? So Rabbi Kalmili, including everything. Then umay meat. So when you're saying be specific, what are you excluding? Oh, so that depends. We're excluding very little with Riba Riba. Rabbi Eliezer, miyut tzir. According to him, we're going to be excluding fish brine. It's not really a pre. It's just the brine. So fine. So then it'll be only fish. Or all other items. But he's actually he actually includes brine, but mid maim melch, he excludes salt water. Though salt and water, that's not going to be included in what you could purchase. And that's why we had asked him on Alf. He said, hey, even he holds you can't use salt water. He says, yeah, you're right, we're talking about with oil. But at least they're including fish. But the Hanatanoid Darshi Klal Prati, the other Tanaim, they expounded in a Klal Prat, the Tanakh in the Brisa. They expounded the same pasuk. You could give your money wherever your heart desires. That's a klal. It's a general statement. But that's a prat. That's a specific. These specific things. Whatever your heart wants, that's chazal klal. Again, it says a general statement. That's what's known as klal prat. The klal. This is what most people know more than Riba because Rabbi Shmuel, who is his famous brayso that we say Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, right? And this is the Yudimul Shater Yeshua. We say klal prat klal, but there are those Tanaim that don't say klal prat. They say Riba mid Riba. But how does what's the halacha? So that's what's called iyatadan ilke in a prat. You only qualify what's similar to the specific. When you have a klal, general, specific, and then general, you're going to say it's not only the specifics because you're saying general statements too, but it has to be similar to the specific. Now, what does that mean? So we actually have machlekes regarding what does it mean, how similar does that have to be to the specifics. It has to have the characteristics of the specifics. Maha prat for it's just like the specifics. They're explicitly that they are whatever items that were mentioned over there. We said babakar, tzayin, yayin, shecher, all of them are what's called pre-mepri. They're a product from a product. So for example, a calf is born from its mother. A sheep is also from its mother. Grapes come from seeds, which you plant. So all the things mentioned in the pasuk are a derivative from a derivative, a pre from a pre. And so too, b'giduli karka. They grow from the ground, which as Rashi already addresses, cows don't grow from the ground, but they're at least fed and sustained from the ground. So they're also considered giduli karka. And of course, grapes, they grow from the ground. So of course, so to anything that you can include, what you can purchase with Ma'aser Sheni funds, has to be pre-gedula karka, has to be a derivative from a derivative, and it has to grow from the ground. Now, that's one version. When we say Hani Tanoi Del Kamon, we said there's two Tanoim that are expounding with Klal Prat, not with Ribi Muit. Ribi Muit were those on Oman Alf. They included almost everything besides fish brine or just salt and water. These Tanoim, they're not including everything because they're learning Klal Prat to Klal. It's more like the specifics. The first Tana said it with two criteria. The Tanidich, however, learned another brayso that's also expounding with Klal Prat, but he actually says three criteria. He says Ma Prat before it's just like the specifics. They're explicitly Vladis ha'aretz. They're also things that are created from the earth by Ma'aser Bereshis. When the world was created, they came from the ground, meaning animals came from the ground. They were from Hadama. Of course, so to anything that is this third criteria of Vlad Vladasaretz, it's a child from a child that was created from the ground will also be included. It says, What's going to be the difference between those two different versions? What is the third criterion add on more than the first criterion had said? The first criterion had said that it has to be geduli karka and it has to be pri. What does vlad v'sa'aretz say different? Abaye says dogimik by night. The difference between them is fish, as the Gemara explains. This is Abaye, and we're going to ask an Abaye as we continue to the next daf. The first version that said that it's a derivative from a derivative and it grows from the ground. So honey dogim, these fish, geduli karka ninu. They grow from the ground, which, as Rashi explains, Abaye thinks, at least now in the Havamina, that fish are sustained from the ground. Somehow they get their sustenance from the ground, just like animals eat vegetation from the ground. Fish also get their sustenance from the ground. So it would be considered geduli karka, and that's also pri. A fish comes from a fish who spawns, right? We know they go to Alaska and the grizzly bears get to eat them, right? We get to watch very close, right? So those are things that they're geduli karka and they're also pri. But those who are a vlad that came from the ground, no, dogim mimayi ivri. Fish were not created from the ground like animals. Fish were created from water, and therefore they would not be included, and therefore that would be the difference between those two man da'amim and the klal prat. You're adding on the third criterion of vlad zaretz, the difference would be fish. But again, the Gemara is ultimately going to come out on the next amid that actually fish, everyone agrees, the whole klal prat are not included. And therefore, that would be the difference between the man da'amim that we said in Aman Alf, that say ribu miyutu, that they include basically everything besides either salt or water or fish brine, but fish would be included. But the klal prat man da'amim, they would be excluding fish because fish are not things that are included in geduli karka, as we'll see on the next amid. And therefore, that's going to be the difference between those interpretations that fish is included if you could purchase kesamaisa sheni funds or not. Something that we discussed in today's daf in Eruvin Daf Zayin was we had a teaching from Rabbi Yechon that says you cannot learn out from general statements. And even where it says chutz, so you would think, okay, you can't learn out from a rule, but I'm saying the exception to the rule. Even when you say the exception, there could be other things. And we had three different places. Where did Rabbi Yechon say his halacha? Because from the fact that he says afillah, obviously he wasn't going to a place where it says chutz, or else you wouldn't have to say afillah, because obviously that would be inherent in where you're saying it. So he said in the Mishnah Mesechtes Kedushin. The Mishnah said that any mitzvah stage as man garama, women are exempt. Wait a second. There's matzah, there's simcha and yom tov, there's haka where it's time bound and women are obligated. And so too, the Mishnah said that if it's not Zman Grama, then women are obligated. Not true. There's learning Torah, having children, redeeming their firstborn son, which is not a specific time, and women are actually exempt. So rather, obviously, you don't learn out from general statements. The second source was the Mishnah Masechta Zavim that said whatever is carried on top of a Zav, so that's going to be Tamei, that's what's known as the way Rashi says, Al Yenishal Zav. Whatever the Zav is on top of that thing actually is tar, except if it's fit to be laid on, if it's fit to be sat on, or if he's on the person. Wait a second, there's another thing that he would make tummy, what's called merkab. Now, merkab is really the same as Moshe, but what we meant was hatafas, what's called gabadul chafa, which is on top of the saddle, there's that piece that you hold on to, that has a tumah of when the zav is on top, and that's a tumah of merkab. Why wasn't that mentioned? Obviously because we don't learn it from clothes. Even when it says chutz, it said the chutz, it said chutz b'mishkav b'meishav and adam. Still, there's another thing that's not included, and you cannot learn it from general rules. And the third one was our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, "Bakol ma'arvin, you can make it with everything except for water and salt, but there's actually truffles and mushrooms too, and that cannot be used for the eruv because you cannot learn out from clothes, even it says chutz." Then we went back to explain the halacha in the Mishnah that says everything can be purchased with ma'aser sheni funds except for water and salt. Now, there was two different versions when we said loy shanu in this halacha of water and salt of not being allowed. One said it was going on ma'aser, and if you say it's going ma'aser, for sure it's going to go on eruv. That this halacha of loy shanu. But then there was another opinion that says it was only going eruv. That what was the statement? Loy shanu, we learned that it's not going to be valid only when you have water and salt by themselves. But if they're actually mixed together, it would be effective. That halacha was only being said on eruv. Because that mandama held on meiser, no, salt water would not be effective. Why? Because you need peri, like we said, from the klal prat, has to be pri, and salt water, even though you could use it as a dip in the yeshiva dip. I know when I went to yeshiva, they took some tzvibel, and you know what I'm saying, with some fefe and oil, you're showing a grace a dip already, right? But it's still not a pri, because it's just salt and water, so although it's usable, maybe for an eruv you could use it because it's going to be considered as for a meal, but it's not going to be considered as a pri. And we actually learned that in the Brisa. We had a machlekes regarding if seer, if brine, does it also require the fish intestines or not? That was the machlekes. Eliezer says, oh, you can't just use brine. Must have been there was fish intestines. Said no, brine is good. But one thing we see is that salt water, however, even if it's mixed together, is not going to be viable because the least that was an option was fish brine, but not salt water. So the Gemara says you're right. Even according to the one that says it's going to be effective to use salt water for meiser, is only if you put oil inside of it. then what we're saying the chiddush is, so the oil, so of course you could purchase. No, the chiddush is b'havla, that you're going to be paying more for the oil because there's water and salt inside of it, that even though those ingredients you're paying for it, that's going to be permitted because that's what's called havla. Where do we know that such a chiddush that you could pay more for non-edible items that are not really included in what you could purchase Ma'aseh Sheni funds? Was in the teaching of Ben Bagbag. He said, and Tais actually says we learn enough from the Beis, because each word he says actually is necessary, but we learn that from Babakar to tell you that even the hide is not edible, you could use it for chulin purposes. You don't have to buy food with that hide. But Tzayin is a bigger chiddush even with the sheins of the wool. Bayayin is telling you could even keep the jug. And Basheich is telling you Tamim Meshahechmetz, that even though it's really just like just acidic water, it doesn't make a difference. You could purchase that with Ma'aseh Sheni funds too. Now, Yich, however, was found difficult with Babakar because he says if you go through the items that were mentioned opposite, so you really know Babakar from the oil already from Tzayin. So Babakar Limali, that was what he was bothered with. He says, I don't understand why you need Babakar, even if you're teaching me the halacha of Havlah. Then we explained the machlokes regarding if fish, that was a category, could they be purchased, fish with kesem, with Ma'aseh Sheni funds or not, really goes with how you expound Sukkah in the Torah. You expound it with what's called Riboy Umeute, so then fish are going to be included, because all we're excluding is very little. You're either excluding just fish brine or just water and salt. But if you expound with klal prat, then you say it has to be ke'ena prat, which is similar to the specifics. So then you could say, which this was all according to the Havamim, and we'll see it's not like that in the next Amid, which either it's going to be only two criteria, which is going to be pre, which has to be something that's a derivative from something else, and it grows from the ground. According to this Havamim, that's wrote in yellow, is then fish would be included, because it is pre-gedula karkali, so we have by originally think. Or there was another brace that says a third criteria has to be a mivlad or it has to be something that was born from the ground, which originally in Sheshim Ebereshis, animals were born from the ground. But fish were not born from the ground, they were made from water. Therefore, fish would not be included. That would be the difference if you expound Riba Murte or a klal or prat. Thank you to any time for hosting us.